Recording. Thank you all very much. We will call our June 2nd, 2026 Policy Committee meeting to order. I will begin by saying with equal parts sadness and joy, this is my last policy committee as a board member. Since 2010, I've been a member of the policy committee, and so I'm handing it off and looking forward to what folks do next. So with that, do we have anyone who signed up for a public comment? We do not. We will continue on with our agenda. Approval of the minutes from the May 5th meeting. Emily and Madeline, any changes or additions?
I wasn't here, so
there you go. Emily, I'm good as well. The minutes are so approved. We'll jump right into discussion items. The first discussion item is agenda item 4.1. This is the naming of facilities and dedication of spaces. Please correct my memory. The board has seen a first version of this without the submission form. The policy committee will be looking at it to send it back to the board for a second reading and adoption should the policy committee choose. So let's just begin by talking about the policy itself, thoughts, reactions, any additions, and then we can get to the submission form as well. Madeline, anything about Emily, anything about the policy itself?
I'm good with what we have so far.
Yeah, I think it's worth watching the conversations.
Fantastic. Then we'll move to the actual form. Just a quick note, I don't know when the last time you looked at it. I sent a message to everybody this morning, and you can see it at the end of the form. Before there's a signature, it does say, please note, and it just borrows the exact same language from the actual policy that the board may, at its discretion, request additional information. I thought that should be on the form, so no one's surprised by it. We may add another line that please see policy such and such, and please note. That'd probably be a good idea to link those, but beyond that, Dan, I think I asked you if you're the person that worked on this with.
It's Casey. Yeah.
But we're borrowing from the central.
Right. I slipped. We looked at their form. It's pretty much from their website.
Yes.
We liked what we saw.
Yep.
Pretty standard.
It looked good to me as well. Provided some information. I think it does help having some context and making the person who's making the ask respectfully do a little bit of work to make sure that has meaning and impact. The board has not decided, and other boards have, Central Islip asked if the honoree is someone who is still with us or deceased. That's a decision that other boards have made. They have struggled to name spaces after people who are still with us. I don't know that that's a good thing. We should probably be giving people their flowers, but I just want to make sure note of that is one thing that some boards have debated before. And otherwise, I think I would say to folks as much as possible, even if the board passes it, to refer to this as a pilot, as in that it can change. We have never had a policy in place. We've never had a practice in place. And so it may change as we learn more about what either is missing, what may be too onerous, whatever it is. But I'd ask the board and administrators to communicate that to folks as well, that we're trying this out. But it looked good to me, Madeline, Emily.
Yeah.
Do we need the person's mailing address?
I don't know if we actually do. Yeah, it's a good question.
I'm just even wondering, like, I can imagine like a group of people who wanted to just like provide contact info instead of like an individual, something about providing it.
I think we're trying to make sure they were within the school district.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
That's the one piece. It's if they're making a request to name something, but they're not actually resident in the city school district, it can be little bit, it could be problematic.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's
Um,
So we move this forward for discussion at an upcoming agenda or next board agenda to take a look at.
Yep.
For a second reading and adoption.
yes.
Fantastic, and thank you to all the people. This is one of those policies that we went round and round doing all kinds of research. Thank you to Emily, thank you to Casey, thank you to Dan, thank you Emily and Madeline. You always think a policy is going to be easy, and then something catches you about how deep it actually go down. And how many different examples we looked at from across the state as well, if not across the Northeast. So thank you all. Let's see what our board colleagues say on June 9th. The next policy, 2111.1, school visits by school board members. We had a brief conversation at the last board meeting. This would also has been up for a first reading previously. We're now looking at possibility of revisions or second reading. We had a couple of questions that may or may not have been addressed. I know one is in the proposed policy content, the third paragraph. There is a line that is crossed out. I think it's, from my read of it, I am perfectly comfortable deleting that line as we discussed. And then I think I put two other additional questions in the policy, but for that first part, third paragraph down, cross that line, the superintendent or building leader may limit the schedule or deny visits if necessary to protect student safety or maintain order or address an emergency condition. I imagine that would happen no matter what. Doesn't mean it needs to be necessarily written in policy. That was one of the things we had. So if that's good by folks, we can just go ahead and delete that. And then there was a question that we had about who would the school board member work with, and change from the original that the school board member would coordinate with the board clerk and the board clerk would work in consultation with the superintendent. But that's how the system would go. There is an expectation of notifying board members in advance. I think I just wrote a note again. Other districts across the state require a majority vote for a BOE member to attend a school in their board capacity. I don't think that's necessary, but I just want to make sure that, for me, that part of letting other board members know is an important part. There's a reason why that happens there. And then of 3A.1, it says at no time shall board members independently visit classrooms or student areas without authorization or accompaniment. And I thought authorization from who? It almost is the reverse of what a board member's role is. So I don't know that I would put authorization. I don't know if we need to say that they would have to be accompanied. Maybe that's something that's good to put in it. I don't know. But the authorization for me didn't make any sense. But the idea of being accompanied, I don't know if there's an expectation if a school board member is visiting the school, should they be accompanied by a teacher, a principal, maybe a student, depending on age level. So thoughts, reactions, comments, recommendations.
I don't think the accompaniment is problematic in any way. I just wonder if it's burdensome in any way to the school itself. And if they wanted to just say, please go check out that classroom.
Yeah.
So if anything, I guess I would ask leaders their input on that. Or think about phrasing it in the way that, you know, as determined by, but I'm just going up to see.
Yeah.
I guess like the 1A also, the board members wishing to visit a school, in their official capacity shall coordinate with the board clerk in consultation with the superintendent. Does that kind of cover, or could it be covered there in like coordinating the visit? Does that include like making sure that there's an agreement with the school leader about if they're going to be going to the company or not?
What happens in a scenario where sort of the reverse happens, where there's a contentious situation taking place and a board member says, I don't want anyone to be with me. I want to just roam the school.
Oh, yeah.
then what's should there be an expectation that there would be someone that's accompanying them? I think that's part of the reason why it may have been written that way, or why some schools and some school districts have tried to play around with it. I don't know. I mean, I think again, we had this conversation multiple times. It's hard to write a policy to try to anticipate every scenario, nor should we. But is it just generally good practice to expect that there would be someone accompanying?
Like a visit meeting. And you for the visit.
And we can leave it and ask this question to our board colleagues or ask feedback at the board meeting as well, if there is. The authorization, I would recommend that we remove.
I wonder if it's like at no time shall board members independently visit classrooms like unplanned, or I don't know, something that's like you can't go off outside of like what was like the coordinated visit. Or even changing plan to coordinate up at the top.
Well, if I'm looking, thank you, Emily, for that. Now that you say that, I'm also looking at 3B. Doesn't it already say that?
That's what we're talking about. I think.
Yeah. Board members shall be accompanied during the visit by the superintendent, designee, or building leader.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
So we don't even need the second part,
Yeah,
right? I mean, it's
you're right.
redundant.
That's, yeah, it is. So then the question was to be like 3B.
Yeah,
But
right.
it also specifies at no time, the board member, so like it makes it more clear. That we can just say like, well, if that person got busy, but something came up, let me just then be on my own.
I prefer the flexibility of, there's an expectation that you'll be accompanied, but to your point, like, hey, lunch is taking place, how about you go
Yeah,
have lunch? So I'd be a fan of actually making it flexible, but having the expectation that people would be accompanied.
Yeah.
So I hear, different ways, but that at least the hard, fast rules always make me a little uncomfortable. Because one, they're hard to impose, they're hard to implement. What's the consequence? What does it mean?
I like just the regular 3B, because then. Like it said that they should be accompanied during their visit, not necessarily like. So which means like they're accompanied in the beginning and then it's up to whomever they're with to make decisions about exactly what and where.
Yeah, it's funny, again, taking samples from different school districts who are writing policies for different reasons.
Yeah.
Right, they're usually trying to address something specific, so I'd be a fan of deleting the one after the. I don't think we need it, to be honest. And then you can remove my comment, that was just for you to have on record. I think we addressed everything else that we did most of this work on during the board meeting, so thank you, Emily, for capturing our conversation and what was done, but this policy reads well to me. Other board members may have some other suggestions or ideas, or Emily or Madeline, if things you want to first address now. Let's have fun and have at it.
I'd be happy to get the rest of the boards involved. So.
The only thing I was just questioning was if it was helpful to add something where it states that whoever board member goes to a specific school. Like comes back and like I guess share with the board what they learned, yeah, so then that way. Each board member doesn't have to like go through the same process if we don't need to like disrupt classrooms, things like that.
I love the idea. How does that happen though? It happens in public. That makes me a little uncomfortable.
Well, unless it's like a more like a personnel confidential issue. But if it's just like, I don't know, curriculum or anything that is, we can discuss in public.
Yeah, I think we do that. Sometimes at least anyway, so it's about like what kind of language do we want to put into policy that's not gonna. Add like. Complicated factors while also kind of expressing that we recognize that that's a benefit of board members, like attending these visits, is to be able to kind of share out without setting like a requirement around it. Maybe some more in the intro than.
There's similar language in the board member attendance of conferences. There's a statement about reporting out to the board following tomorrow. from that.
Which we try to do, which we have put as an agenda item, right, like the. Update from attending this
Yes.
conference, right, like that's usually been an agenda item, okay. Where, location and you know, where you think it would go? Would it be like, bullet point 4? Under the procedures for official visit by school board members?
Again, there is an opportunity like under at the very top, like of the official school visits by board members, like the purpose of school visits by board members. Shall be to enhance board members' understanding of district operations, programs, operations and activities. Something like. And it's generally expected that. You know. And in order to support that, it's generally encouraged for board members to report out. To fellow colleagues or something.
Well, before we do that, if we go down 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th paragraph, where it begins with additionally. It says any questions, observations, or concerns shall be communicated through the superintendent or designee. So how are they in conflict with each other? I think there's an expectation that if there is a concern or an idea that would be dealt with or addressed directly between the superintendent and the board member.
But would it be beneficial for the entire board to be aware? Whether it's like a good thing or a bad thing, like regardless.
I completely agree, trying to figure out. It's a little different with the conference presentation, right? Because in essence, you're going back to what you learned. The school visits aren't always about learning. Maybe they are. I'm open to wherever folks may want to put something like that. If we want to just agree that we'll have something in by next week and we can send around via email, if this is a good place that folks approve, or we can at least even discuss it amongst our colleagues and see if anyone has suggested language, if that makes sense as well, if that works. Okay. Does that work by you, Emily?
Yes.
All right, so we'll move it forward with the note that we're gonna try to find some language about some sort of report out or sharing of information. Great, thank you.
The plan still for second reading and adoption.
Yes. We can get there. 4.3, moving on, 4.3, student ex officio, member of the board policy. This one I know we have a couple of questions about and conversations that need to happen. I see we have some folks joining us in the audience as well. Thank you for being here. You can feel free to come up at any point in time too if you want to join the conversation. Yeah. How do you want to proceed, board colleagues? I know there's some questions that we have, but
Did you all come to speak about a specific thing or just to weigh in generally on
I had some things I wanted to talk about.
some specific?
Yeah, I had been emailing Dr. Bradwell. I was just kind of confused. Right now, what's going on at IHS is that we're having our elections this week, and like in the last 2 weeks, there have been switches back and forth, and everyone's kind of confused about how these elections are going to work because initially, for years we've elected 4 by the student body, and now this year they said we were going to elect 2, and then last Friday they sent another email out saying we were going to elect 4. And now I went to go talk to Ms. Ballmeyer today, and she said we're electing 2, and that 2 would be appointed in some way. And I guess there's just a lot of confusion about 1, what's actually happening, and then 2, if there's going to be appointments, how that's going to work. Because I think there are a lot of logistical issues with that.
Okay, so that's one issue. And then did you have something in specific or?
I mean, there are some general things
More
I
general.
want to talk about that can wait a bit.
Okay. Okay.
I think that's the biggest issue, figuring out
Okay.
what's actually happening with the IHS.
I think the changes that have happened this year have been sort of almost rushed. It seems like there wasn't like some of the stuff that we're doing. We're having appointments. Like no one knows how those appointments are happening yet, and so it seems kind of rushed to go into this saying we're going to appoint these 2 people when like we haven't planned it out, so we don't even know that those appointments are actually going to be more equitable than an election or more fair than an election in any way. So I guess that's just my question.
Yeah, I think, one, I want to make sure we add language in here somehow that addresses or identifies LACS's student board liaison handbook, right? That right now, the way in which the language is written, it's, each school will do its own thing. LACS put together something, right? So that sort of gets that, but that I think we might want to consider putting some sort of language about that into policy. The conversation for me about student elections of board reps is an important one. And so, yes, there's no doubt there's confusion. Rushed may not be the appropriate word, though lack of clarity may be better, right? Because this has been an ongoing conversation for almost a full year about representation and about who serves in this role, even what the purpose of the role is. And so as the policy committee has been going back and forth and hearing students clearly articulate that seeing that this role as a role of student advocacy, which may be slightly different than how some of us were thinking about it in the beginning about an actual ex officio member role, thinking about that idea about student advocacy as well. And the board has had concerns for some time about who serves in those roles and what is the representation of those roles. I wrote something to my fellow board members, and this is to be congratulated and celebrated. In 17 years, I don't think I've ever had a student rep that was not college bound. That is not to say anything in particular, but it does say it sometimes may be a particular type of student that gets elected. Sometimes the elections we know, unless high school has changed dramatically, let me rephrase that, high school has changed dramatically since when I was in there. But as someone who was elected to student government as well, I was aware that part of it was a popularity contest. And so trying to find ways to address those in a real way that keeps student voice and keeps part of the process. One of the compromises that we came to at one point in time, and everyone's not there now, but one of the compromises we came to during our last full school board discussion was, well, maybe we elect two, and maybe we find a process where two others are appointed or selected via a different mode or operation. The concern was if we know we're going to make this change, then we elect four, then we're keeping that process going around for one more year, which is something that's definitely on the table for the school board members. Or can we envision that it may not be an appointment that happens in the next 2 weeks, but maybe between now and the beginning of next school year, there is a process by which two additional students get asked to be student reps from Ithaca High School. The board does not want to, I think I can say this, the board does not want to appoint students. And what that process can look like for me is any number of things. Maybe it's a different student commission that does it. Maybe it's a collaboration with the board. Maybe it's, I don't know. And so I know that's the messiness that folks are probably asking, like, what does it actually look like? But for me as one board member, I'd like to find a way in which we can think about how the purpose of those roles, the importance of those roles, and may it be time to do something different. I should have looked at the history to see how long we've been electing the student reps from the high school. And I don't know how long it is, though there's nothing that mandates that should happen or could happen. The board could choose to appoint one person or four people. The principal could, or principals could appoint, the superintendent could appoint, or it could be by general election of the general student body. And so this is the conversation to have. Let's see where we're at.
I think sort of the problem on the student side is that without any clarity going into elections, students feel like their voices are underrepresented because we can only elect two people, and then we have no real assurance that whatever appointment process is actually be equitable. I came back in December with that survey, and 96% of students wanted a direct election or an election through student government. But the problem with election through student government is that our student government doesn't really work. Our student council has like 20 people in it, and I think all of them are freshmen. And so 96% of people don't want appointments of any kind. And so I think this is where the problem is coming from the student side, is that we just feel like even though we come with these surveys and we say like no one wants appointments, then the administration decides that we're going to do appointments anyway, or some sort of other selection process, and it feels to the students like our voices are just being taken away, and so we.
But if that were the case, and my apologies for the interruption, then we would do no elections whatsoever.
Sure.
Right, so the board has the privilege to appoint if that's what they choose to do. So where's the compromise? If we identify there's a problem with representation, and I hope we can all identify there has not a problem, that there's a particular type of representation, and if we're trying to expand that, and then is there ever a compromise saying that we do something different? What I'm saying to you, Jude, is not something I haven't said to anybody else in the room. I love democracy, and majority rules demands that minority voices get silenced and marginalized. So if it's always done by this notion of a vote, there's always going to be a particular type of student that would never be selected for that role. And so I'm trying to find a way in which, without question, students' voice gets affirmed. We heard it, absolutely. We need an election process. And maybe the idea is 3 students get elected and 1 student gets appointed. But I feel like we have an opportunity to do something to change the voice, to increase the voices that get to sit at the table. Not to change. I don't want to change them. I want to increase them. Again, at one board now.
Can you also remind us how many people responded to that survey?
It's a few hundred. I don't know the exact number.
Do you remember, do you have information? Did you guys end up like collecting any information about demographics and
No.
other? So if you.
I understand.
Like 1,400 students and.
Yeah.
So 96% of the.
Yes,
the
certain
students
students,
that
yeah.
were.
I just want to mention also that during this process, we had different student groups that came in and also expressed, we're really not aware of the process. We really don't feel confident. We really don't know what's going on. And some students have said, well, student reps, you guys have said that sometimes with your extracurricular and your other activities and responsibilities that you have, it's kind of, it might be difficult to do an outreach and trying to, go to different groups. But we also have another group that says, hey, we are working with the superintendent student advisory council that said, hey, we are a group that with pretty sizable students members, and we're interested in, and we think we can do it. Can you give us a chance? So I think the part that we're trying to figure out is how to honor all student voices and not just a specific group, but give everybody a chance to have the opportunity to sit at the table and have that. One of the things that I was actually thinking regarding that was maybe having like the high school have the administration reach out or have a sign-up list where students from different groups can sign up or opt in to be thought of in that appointment of the student ex officio. And once you get appointed, like every year, switch that. So that way it's like circling, it's not the same group being represented every single year. I think that's just one idea for me. That could be like if the art kids or the student superintendent, I'm sorry, that's because it's such a long name. Or the, whoever, they can talk to the administration and be like, I want to be considered for that payment this year, and then have a list. We choose 2 for that year, and then the next year we go back to that list. We ask the students, do you still want to be considered? And then we give, like, it's a rotation.
Yeah.
See.
Is it okay if I speak?
Yeah.
Hi, Karen Arnold, if you don't know me, high school principal. We also could come up with a structure where it looks as a diverse staff, that it's not just administration, but counselors, teachers, and really looking at what students often do need to be invited in.
Mm-hmm.
It does take a certain student to be confident enough to put their name out there and show up at the meetings, to put their posters up. It's a risk taking, and the feeling of defeat or rejection is real. And so students, we already know anxiety is at the highest level for our young people. Now we're asking, could be very great representation along with the two elected to come and join and but they need that special push. An election is not the way that it's going to be, but they're gonna get there. I know when we did universal lunch, we brought students in. Students could have also develop what does that structure look like for appointment. And though it's not gonna be a voting in, right? It's a committee that's more diverse than just admin. That makes me uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
It needs to be well representation of who it is that makes up our beautiful community at the high school. So, and the election process isn't going to change with the voting. Yes, it would be only two, it would not, it would be two that would be voted in. And though the two more that by some selection process that we do need to develop, and it won't be perfect at first, but we can readjust, because I do agree that since I've been at the high school, we've talked about who is it that represents the high school and sitting at the table with the Board of Education. And it is an identified problem. We have a really great opportunity to change that. And you all get to be a part of that change, which is pretty exciting.
Thank you. I think that I totally agree. I think that there's a lot of opportunity there, and I agree that to ask you, for example, to appoint two people from the entire high school seems problematic, especially for you, but in a number of ways. And I think that being able to have kind of a diverse group of students, both represented in two different groups, even like here, and then also kind of staff and counselors and folks that know the student body more broadly. I also, I think that I carry some concern about wanting to make sure that we're like really thinking about like what the decision is being based off of, and really being able to communicate that well. Because even when we're talking about like diversifying the group, it's not just based on race or gender or interest area or whatever. It's also about like how engaged, like how, like what are you thinking about, what are you excited about being able to utilize this role. Like you've talked in the past, I think when we were thinking about this as a different kind of role of like, is there like an application like should we be having people come in and like write about the amazing things that they would love to be able to kind of foster or facilitate through this work. And so I think that asking a group of students to be able to do that even privately just to share with the group would be a really helpful way to be able to judge based on things that go beyond just trying to kind of guess what group they're in or what they're representing, especially because they may easily be representing 5 different groups or 5 different things. And so I like the idea of making sure that I would love to see an election like that too, to really be emphasizing what the contributions and goals are of somebody that's interested in being in this role. So I guess it's just like a separate piece, but one that I think is really important. And then just as we're talking about this, I want to just make sure to note that appointments, elections, whatever, like for students, I think we had this conversation like 2 meetings ago, like are never going to represent, no matter who they are, the whole student body. And so I think that there's a piece about, as Sean said, about trying to make like just explore and see if there's ways to kind of diversify a little bit and get some new voices to the table. And I want to encourage everyone to really think about like the goal. I think that the most effective way to do that is for those 4 students, whoever they are, to have a good process in place where they are reaching hundreds and hundreds of students through collaborating with the different student groups and across the school and other ways of reaching people, because never are we going to feel like, great, like check the box, these 4 people are really just going to be able to bring everything that's the perspective representative of the entire school. So I think we recognize that it's imperfect no matter what the appointment or decision way of like getting students here, and that the real work, to me at least, is how those students are actually going to engage with the broader population to be able to hear from them.
I think it's hard for students to just accept that there's gonna be 2 appointments. And I understand where you guys come from. I think you make good points that elections can't, because elections don't reach like a certain group of people. But I think it's just hard for students to accept that there's gonna be another way than elections without that process being fleshed out, like. Cause we just, no one knows what's gonna happen, and
Yeah,
like you guys are saying, like, it's gonna be a hard thing to like figure out how we create this appointment process.
Yep.
And it already seems very unclear to students and even some administrators, it seems unclear too.
Yep.
And I just don't know if it's absolutely necessary to make this change right now before we've actually planned stuff out fully.
That's a legit point, right? The flip side, though, the point about students feeling some sort of way, I understand. At the same point in time, I don't understand. And by that, I mean the legislation requires the board to have one student ex officio member. So the board could have said, like we did to LACS, you had 3, you now have 2, right? We could have said to Ithaca High School, you also have 2, right? And so I understand this notion about feels like it's taking away student voice, but the goal does not come from that place of taking away student voice. Yes, there is confusion, and no one likes living in that space. Like, well, what is this process, and why would we do it if we don't know? And at the same point in time, if we don't make an attempt to do it, we won't change it. And I'd be in favor of trying something. If it doesn't work, before any policy could be revisited at any point in time, we go back and say, hey, that worked quite well. Now we realize it. Let's do something different. But I'd be a fan from hearing. We've also, again, heard from other students who have advocated against all 4 reps being elected. And so, to Madeline's point, how do we balance some students saying they want all 4, some students saying they don't want all 4? We're trying to increase ways. I really appreciate the way in which Karen said it. For some students, they have to be invited to participate. They're not going to be the forward, outgoing, right? I'm going to do a platform. I think that's real, and I'm more inclined to live with students being upset with the messiness, and I will apologize for that. To get to a process that may be more. I don't even have great language to say it. So you continue to make excellent points, Jude, and that's why I said I'm looking forward to the conversation. And we have a real opportunity to do something different, and I would like to explore the opportunity as one board. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think based on what having looked into LACS's process, I think one of the most important things to its success was that it was truly student-led, and I don't mean like students and admin co-developing it. I mean it was like fully students like spearheading the process, like and being very involved in fleshing out those details of some of the messy parts. And I think that really did allow, like having student buy-in really did contribute to the success of what we're seeing at there. And I think it should be applied to IHS both for fleshing out elections and how to make those better and for getting a new appointment process if that's what we do.
I'm wondering how much, like, if we were, obviously there are a lot wrong with our elections. We've talked about this earlier in the year that like, there's not really a chance for students to speak, like actually speak to people. We don't have assemblies. There's not a chance for students to meet everyone because it's 4 students and 1,300 people electing them. There's not a chance for reps to meet everyone. And I think there are a lot of things that can be changed about the elections to make them more equitable before we do away with, not completely, I understand, but before we take away 2 elected spots and put in 2 appointed spots. I think there can be things that I think that we can change the elections before doing away with them, I guess. Like, I think almost in some ways it's easier to just change the election process. It wouldn't be that, I mean, I don't know if it's that hard to have an assembly or 2 or let some student reps go into classes and speak with people. I just.
And if I may add, so last year's ranked choice voting was used, and
This year too.
Yeah, this year, but I believe last year I know the program that it was used was RCV 123, and it used what's called single transferable vote, and that's the type of what's called proportional representation, where you get like there's a quota and you have to get past the quota and you don't actually need a majority, and that type of system works so much better at accommodating different voices. I think that and it works also better when you have more seats, like seats up, like more winners, and it's more proportional that way. So I think that it is still a valid option to do 4 elected seats and try and work on the election process.
I want to add, sorry, I want to add that I think roughly 800 students voted last year in our elections, which is almost 3/4 of the students. And for reference, the US national turnout for voting in Congress or presidential elections is like 50 to 60%. And so there's never going to be, like Emily was saying, there's never going to be an instance in where we have perfect representation. And I feel like 3/4 of the school voting is a pretty large amount, especially with ranked choice voting, it seems.
But for me, makes me question, that's about 600 students that didn't vote. Right? Was it 1,400 at the high school, roughly?
Close, I think it's closer to 30.
So,
No, it's like 1386
Okay.
or 1370.
so roughly
Yeah.
about 600 students, so. Are those the minority voices that we're trying to kind of hear from as well? Or, you know, like, what about those students? Why didn't they vote? Why they don't feel like they can engage, or do they even know the process? You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
just, it brings me to ask more questions about like how they feel about it, like
Well,
what are their
this,
thoughts?
this is what I mean, is that like I think that there can be 600 students isn't actually that many students. And when you think about the amount of students that aren't at school, and then you think about the amount of students that's left, you can reach those students pretty easily to educate them about the process. I think that there are ways that we can educate students about the process and change the process, or we just replace it.
If I can jump in just for a second, I think one of the things that I'm just going to be honest about that I feel like a little frustrated with at this point is that we've been talking about these challenges like this entire, we've been talking about this for months and months and months, and about the challenges. And especially like, I think that the committee has been extremely clear about like our biggest concerns, which are representation and making sure that we're hearing from all student voices. And we have heard from certainly student reps and then additional folks like so many times. We've had so many of these conversations, and we have voiced a lot of concerns or questions about the election process specifically. And unless I'm not recalling, I don't remember any time until right now that there was a discussion about like, we acknowledge that this is probably not the best like structure for our elections. We hear and agree that, you know, we need better, you know, there might be better ways of hearing from all student voices. Here's an idea of a way to build the election system in a different way, or to make it more equitable. And so I think that there's a little part of me that's kind of like, we kind of got to this point of like, well, how can we come up with a solution that feels like it might, and I'm not talking on behalf of you all at this point, but like a little part of me is kind of like, well, we went around in circles on like so many things. And we're like, how could we possibly do this? And we thought finally, like, maybe it's that we need a totally different way of helping other student voices come here. And now I'm like, oh, you guys are making some really great points. And I, you know, have no idea what, you know, system you're talking about that used that. But now here we are in June, and there's already concerns about things being really delayed and how do we make decisions. And so there's a little part of me that's kind of don't really know what to do with that, because then I'm like, well, one option is to just kind of stay the course for another year, even though I feel like we've heard confirmation from plenty of people, I would say at this point, that there's like some significant concerns about the current process. Or we could we could just go out with our like whatever idea is like kind of like been posed so far, try it out for a year and work with the student reps again for the next year to try to come up with a more effective system so that we could go back to full voting if you all saw fit. Or do we do just like two and allow two to just be on the board for the year as we're figuring it out? Or do we just say the election is finalized as it is now, two people are being elected? That's kind of the end of the conversation as far as the election. We will be working with school administration and students or whatever over the summer to hopefully appoint two additional students at the beginning of the year. But I feel a little bit like I'm like, oh my gosh, this like new information and new ideas are coming at a time where we're a little bit against the wall in terms of timing. And this is not like, this is kind of like how
Yeah.
policy development works. I feel like we ran into this same thing when we were trying to do create the cell phone policy last year. And as you can even see from our board meetings, it still seems like board members weren't like, there's a lot of confusion and disagreement about that as well, because at some point, policymakers have to implement policies and kind of see how they kind of play out. So I don't know if you have thoughts or if you want to share more, but I feel like that's where I'm at this point with it. Yeah.
I think we did talk about it though earlier in the year. I remember having conversations about how we could change elections, and I remember talking about maybe having assemblies and maybe having us go into rooms, and I remember talking about education. And so I don't mean to like, no disrespect, but I do remember talking about this, and I think this has been kind of the student perspective. And
Judah,
Yeah.
you are such an amazing advocate, so I'm so appreciative. And you keep saying students as if you're speaking for all students, right? And so that's the only thing that I'm struggling with. You're making amazing points. You're saying the student perspective, when we've had other students ask for other things. And so that's the tension point for us, if that makes sense. Right? But yes, you definitely said about, I remember talking about assemblies and changing the process. So, right, maybe the idea is, it is what it is, and we go that route, we acknowledge that we're gonna continue to have this gap. Maybe the idea is, we only say two for the upcoming year, and no selections. I don't think I wanna keep saying appointments, because I don't think it'd be appointed, you know,
Yeah.
but I understand the idea. So I'm trying to figure out where we and I'm invested in the policy. I'm more invested in having students at the table, right? So, you know, how we make that happen is something. And I think all of us recognize that it is very poor timing to be having this conversation.
Yeah.
That part we recognize, right? People have already done their voting's Thursday, am I not mistaken?
Friday. Yeah.
Very poor timing for us to have that conversation. As a board, I'll that part I'll like, and we're demonstrating the frustration that we've been having ourselves going.
Yeah.
And you should not be, again, you're an amazing advocate. You should not feel like you are the sole voice for all folks as well, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I definitely understand it.
I would also like to raise a thing. I know Lionel brought it up at the last board meeting, but the idea of alternates, because currently there are challenges getting 6 people like to be able to constantly invest their time into it, and that's resulted in gaps in attendance, which are understandable. Like all the reps are missing in decent amounts of meetings, and because like it's hard to be able to come here every 2 weeks for 3 hours or so. And the idea was potentially allowing schools to designate like half as many alternates as they have reps voluntarily if they so choose. Whether or not that would be valuable, like to have in the policy, and then in the future, you know, Ms. Arnold could say, oh, maybe we should have extra alternates to help with attendance. That's something I want to throw out there, and that could also maybe help with the election versus appointment process. Like you could switch them either way to like compensate somehow.
It's a good point.
I do wonder though if we're at this point going to have like one member each time from each school kind of taking on the like speaker role, that we cut like it almost takes on that role that like if there are 4 IHS folks, that means that, and it would actually improve things a lot, because I think it's very, very rare that we haven't had a single person from one of the schools. And so being able to make sure that there's somebody here that's kind of representing the group and representing the broader community. I love your idea. I just wonder if, because the system will change a little bit that way, that we will have that through a grouping.
I am mindful of time, 10 minutes left in this meeting to try to come to some sort of direction. I also realize that no committee is able to make a decision on behalf of the board. There is a policy, let me rephrase that. The policy does not stipulate the practice. With that being said, following things like Robert's rules, I guess I would be uncomfortable, and maybe this is Judah's point, saying do this for Friday when the board has not authorized a change in the process. I
Yes.
still feel the process is exclusive and exclusionary. And that part I'll continue to say. And it has been for my 17 years on the board. It's rare that I've seen a cross section, as difficult as that may be, in the role. And yet, I don't think we are in a position to be like, you're doing this for, let me rephrase that. We are not in a position as a committee. We don't have the authorization. So if that is the case, despite what I want, this is not about what I want, it's about process. I guess I would say to Ithaca High School, as late as it is, then proceed with your practice for Friday with your current practice, because the board has not made a decision in time as a collective, as a majority of the board, to make a vote. And maybe our recommendation to the board with this policy would be, we do anticipate future changes, and that would probably give us time to work with Karen and the administration to come up with a process that students know in advance. And saying that if the policy got passed that way, folks would know that this year moving forward, this is what we're trying to do, and this is why we're trying to do it. That's probably the best way moving forward, because I think about time constraints, and I think about what our authority is as a committee.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that in an email to you all, and I think as much as I'm pushing back, and I do want to clarify that, yes, I remember talking about those things, and I don't think that like throwing ideas out like that is quite the same thing as like coming with a concrete like plan of a new suggestion of way and doing things. So I think I'll meet you in the middle on that one for sure. But you definitely brought some ideas. I actually had been recently advocating not focusing on appointments as much as I'm playing kind of like both sides right now. And I do think that there are some major flaws in the way things are working right now. But I feel very, very strongly about what we talked about like 2 weeks ago, which I just mentioned about like, I think that is less about who's sitting at the table and more about the processes that are put into place. And you guys have done an amazing job of trying to implement some of these more and more and more. And I think that doing something as substantial as what I'm thinking about will take a lot more engagement from not just the four of you trying to come up with really good ideas, but from working collaboratively with administration and other student groups and so on and so forth. But I feel most strongly, and I guess I'm voicing this because I'm happy to say, yes, go on as usual. I'm actually surprised that somebody was emailing you back and forth about now it's this, now it's that, because there is no policy and hasn't been. So I'm not sure where that information was coming from. But I do want to make sure that whenever a policy is in place before next school year, and that there is some sort of pretty clear expectation about some really in-depth new processes and ways that students are going to be reached. So that's what matters more to me than.
I am probably the person responsible for some of the communication going back and forth. And by that, I mean, it didn't seem, if we were going to change the procedure, it seemed unfair to elect 4 people and then tell 2 of you after the fact, no, we're actually going to change this process. And so I was advocating for a change this year, and realizing after some quick emails back and forth, obviously, no single board member has the authority to make that change. Despite, which I will say, and I was going off of what seemed to be consensus at our last board meeting about 2 selections and 2 elections. There seemed to be consensus amongst the board that was there moving that path. So it wasn't like I was trying to do that arbitrarily. But I do understand this timing, the situation which we find ourselves in. And so I think probably as a committee, we'd say, we're not going to disrupt the process because we haven't done our part in time to have the policy in place in time. I did say this, with great love and respect to Judith, it's not improper. At any
Yeah.
point in time, the board can choose to change the process because there is no process set. And with that being said, I can understand the confusion that's causing for administrators, for teachers, for students, for, our ESPs. I understand that. So I think we just say, go ahead and move forward this year and we'll work, or whoever will work with administration to create a different process moving forward.
So,
Or try to pilot a different program or process. I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and have 4 elected for this year, knowing that we should, by the board's encouragement, come up with a system for 2 the following year, 2 elected and 2 appointed in some way.
I think that's what I would be advocating for. I think it will be dependent upon if the board passes the policy in that way. And so it'll still take a majority vote of the board. But that's the part that I'm on, the part that I'm uncomfortable about saying to IHS, change your process when a majority of the board has not said change your process.
But just to clarify, when we say process, we're talking about the election, not necessarily all of the other stuff that will be in place.
Yes.
They actually kick
Yeah.
off.
Some of those things will be in place prior to whoever gets seated.
Right.
And it's a reminder to me, again, with Robert's rules, students who are ex officio members, and that's one thing we'll have to talk about. What does that look like in terms of who has the opportunity to have the privilege of the floor? So students seated at the table, it's not just being at the table. Students get recognized as part of a board meeting, which usually does not happen for audience members, right? That there's not the privilege of the floor for an audience member. There is a privilege of the floor for our student reps. And so it has a very heightened status. And so that language will be clarified and ready to go starting next school year. So we'll figure out, does LECS select one person to be the ex officio member for this meeting, that meeting? So there will be still some change that will take place. But in terms of what you came to advocate for, you did a phenomenal job advocating. Are we in tentative agreement?
Yeah.
3 minutes, can we do it?
I believe.
Are we all separate right now? We're gonna continue working on this policy. The time crunch isn't as big as it is if we know what's taking place for Ithaca High School. Karen has said it quite well in terms of what the summary is, and we'll follow from there and clean up this policy as best we can.
And I do want to say, beautiful news, 12 students are running. I think that's the most we've ever had for that. So Yeah.
That part feels good.
Yeah. More running for Board of Ed reps than they are for their class.
I have been impressed by the amount of time and engagement and participation that students have given to this policy in a variety of ways. Emails, phone calls, meetings, just greatly appreciated, right? We're all trying to learn and we learn, so thank you very much for that. So we're gonna table this policy for the time being. We'll go from there. We may do some other work. And we have 1 minute. The last policy should be a simple change. This is policy 4.4. It was brought to our attention by members of the ITA, so we thank them for it. The policy is outdated. It was last updated in 2008. Since then, the law has changed. I've had a conversation with Mr. Van Kuren about the law as well as our legal counsel. And so Emily has done a great job of going through, leaving the comments up there, but going through and changing the policy to be in line with what the state regulations say, changing some of the language. Just for example, there's no longer leave for breast or prostate cancer, it's leave for cancer screening. So I recommend that we accept Emily's changes for a first reading. There was an ask by the email that board members received for the policy committee that the hours be extended for a full day. I am under the impression, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that would not be possible without it being a negotiated item. And that would take negotiation with multiple unions, not just a single union. That the law allows or requires or demands 4 hours of leave. But anything in addition to that, we would have to discuss. That's my understanding. But there are other things, the language is extremely outdated, it's gendered, it does a host of things. Yes, Catherine, we have 30 seconds.
The one reason that we brought forward the 4-hour situation is because for the ITA unit and the ESP unit, 4 hours is not an increment of time that you can report absent for duty. So as you work through this policy, we would love for there to be a way to actually recognize the system that we have to use for our absences and make those.
Absolutely.
Whichever way.
So a half day is like 3 hours. And a whole day is 6 hours.
And New York State said 4 hours. I'm just putting it out there, right? So I agree, it's incompatible, right?
Yeah.
So, but for it to get the policy started, there's changes that we need to make that keep it in line with what the new recommendations and what the new regulations are. And that is changing some of the language again, what it looks like. The additional conversation is one that board looks forward to have. We don't have to put it forth immediately as well. No, the board will take a look at it.
Committee in agreement to accept the current changes.
I went through and I did not do nearly as good of a job as Emily did, so I'm willing to trust Emily as for our first reading.
Sure.
Sounds good. I am already 1 minute over. I apologize. 2 more items, if we can, 3 more items. Emily Tracy Arm has done an amazing job of taking a look and making a list of annual policies that need to be reviewed. That is something that I recommend the future policy committee explore. And so Emily can send that along. We received a request from members of the IPDA that the policy committee will take a look at open enrollment and the way in which we track absenteeism and tardies. And so I recommend that be on for a future agenda item. And we had a request from someone that the board consider looking and or creating a separate policy on hazing from harassment and from bullying. Because I can in the 3 seconds, I would be weary, as much as I may be, I have 0 tolerance for hazing, but I have 0 tolerance for 0 tolerance policies. And so I would ask the board to humbly consider to be very careful if we're looking at any 0 tolerance policy, even while a very strong policy against hazing could be written. But 0 tolerance policies have historically shown to be further marginalizing of particular groups of students, and we may not want that. But with that, all that being said, a future policy committee should take a look at a hazing policy. I do think there's a legitimate idea of separating that from discrimination and bullying, and it does create its own separate entity. And so something for folks to consider. So those are 3 potential agenda items for some other version of the policy committee. Any other? Yes.
Just before we close out, just as a follow-up to the kickoff meeting, just want to say a big thank you to you for your leadership on the policy committee for so long. It makes me wonder how old you actually are. But thank you, and I know that you've done tremendous work over those 16 years and have really set us up for success as we move forward. So I appreciate all of that.
Very complicated, and I definitely had my AARP card. So with that, we'll bring this meeting to a close. Thank you all very much.